The White House continues its crackdown and, many would argue, stonewalling when it comes to the media. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders, she hasn't held a briefing in nearly 2 months. Also, the Washington Post reporting that the White House has cracked down on what are called hard passes. They allow access to reporters on a daily basis. Now, journalists have to enter the White House grounds 50% of the time in the 6 months before renewal. If they don't get the passes renewed. Post op-ed columnist Dana Milbank, he was one of the writers impacted by this, and I want to read a portion of what he wrote. Quote, "I was part of a mass purge of hard pass holders, including all 7 of the Post White House correspondents. White House officials then chose which journalists would be granted quote-unquote exceptions. The Post requested exceptions for its 7 White House reporters and for me, saying that this access was essential to our work. The White House press office granted exceptions to the other 7, but not to me. I strongly suspect it's because I'm a Trump critic." Dana Milbank joins us now. And Dan, let's break it into a couple parts. First off, tell somebody at home why it matters. If they haven't done a press conference in a couple months, and when they do, they don't really answer any questions anyway, give the value of a reporter being able to go to the White House and at least try.
Well, it's a fair question because it has significantly been devalued lately, because I think it's been 2 months since Sarah Sanders gave a briefing. Many of the, an increasing number of the president's events are closed to the press, or if they let the press in at all, it'll be a small rotating group called the pool. So that is actually what's driven people to be there less and less, and then they came and cracked down by saying, okay, well, people aren't here, therefore we're going to take away your press pass. So it sort of became a vicious cycle. Now, why do people need access? Well, look, it's a tradition throughout our democracy that that our high officials can be questioned and held to account. They don't have to answer, but we at least get to ask the question. I think the more important principle is that the president shouldn't get to choose who is covering him from news organizations. The news organizations get to choose that, because, I mean, you could see this coming to an extreme. We don't know if it's going to go to that, but it could come to an extreme where this president kicks out anybody who's criticizing him, and then say we have Bernie Sanders in, and he kicks out, any conservative who criticizes him. And you can see why that would not work very well as a way, a way for the press to function in a democracy and in a free society.
As a frame of reference, you've covered multiple administrations, Republicans and Democrats, and I'm sure press secretaries for every administration have wanted to, if not strangle you, certainly take away your pass at different times, but it didn't happen in the Bush administration, didn't happen in Clinton or Obama. Was there a general understanding, and I saw Joe Lockhart's piece, that they may not like all the time what you write or the questions you may ask, but there's a necessary compact. Did they know that innately? Did they have to learn that on the gig? Why is this particular White House so different than all the predecessors?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not like written in the First Amendment that the president has to let reporters into the White House. He could have nobody into the White House at all. But, we're often talking about norms in our democracy. The norm that the president doesn't interfere in criminal investigations. This president has shattered all kinds of norms, many having nothing to do with the press, but a lot of them having to do with the press. So you're right. I've had disputes with all kinds of presidents, administrations, Republican and Democratic. I think if they really like what you're doing, you're probably not doing your job, because your job is to be there and to be skeptical. So this has been the American tradition. It still remains that to some extent, but it is certainly under threat now, as there has been a culling. The idea, even those people now remaining in the White House, because almost all of them are there under exception, so technically they're in violation. And the White House, Sarah Sanders can say, hey, I don't like what that guy just wrote, or I don't like what's on her broadcast. Kicking them out. They don't get to come into the White House anymore. And you can see why you can't really have a free society if that's going to be the prevailing rule.
You've certainly heard firsthand some things that you probably haven't heard before the last couple of years, from everything that the press in toto is the enemy of the people. I mean, listen, the job of any administration spokesperson is to give the perspective of the administration and to spin, but not to outright lie, and even when called on it, show zero shame or chagrin whatsoever. We've seen that repeatedly. And also, we've seen almost an egging on to target the press, Jim Acosta most notably of that. What have you heard and what have you seen that's really concerned you the most, that's not just the craziness but goes beyond that?
Right. Well, I think this is an outgrowth of the Acosta situation, because the judge in that case said, hey, you've got to let him back in because you don't have an orderly process for how you credential people and how you would kick them out. This is the answer to that. This is the process they put in place, and it basically allows them to kick anybody out. You know, look, I think the president enjoys doing this sort of thing because he does enjoy using the press as a foil, the enemy of the people. Look, I find that it's disturbing, but I don't find it particularly alarming in the domestic sense, because I don't believe that we're going to lose our sense of a free press here. However, when you talk about the press as the enemy of the people, you're echoing people like Stalin and like Mao, and undemocratic leaders, autocrats from around the world are seeing this. Even the United States has this. They feel emboldened to crack down on their press, often in violent and extreme ways that we could never even fathom here. So I think the biggest danger in what the president's doing is it's sending a sign to all the autocrats around the world that what they're doing is just fine.
I guess my last question is, you said it yourself. If Bernie Sanders was president and all of a sudden he told the folks from Fox or Breitbart, whatever, they're not allowed to have a seat at the table or to ask any more questions, my guess is that you, your colleagues at the Post, the Times, etc., would have seen that as a bright line and said, no, you've gone too far here. You don't get to pick and choose. Why hasn't the media, in a broader sense, stood up together and said, no, we're not going to, go for just gaggles anymore. No, we're not going to tolerate that, that we'll only get certain folks picked on or whatever, because it may be now with Trump, but the next time it could be me.
Yeah. Well, I think the way you laid out the question is the answer, because it's been sort of a drip, drip, drip thing. There was a huge protest when they did it to Acosta because it was so blatant, the reason for doing it. We saw it there on video. When you take away the briefing, when basically what they're doing is fiddling now with the regulations. It's hard to make a huge stand based on that. So if you sort of chip away at it bit by bit, rather than taking a whole-on assault on the First Amendment, it's harder to sort of rally against that, one point. I think my colleagues in the press are alarmed about what they're seeing going on here, but, let's face it, I'm still going to be able to, I'll cover the White House. I just won't, go onto the grounds, or I'll go through whatever hurdles I need to do to get onto the grounds. That's not a crisis. The problem is when you add up all of these things that have been happening over the last couple of years, you get to a really bad place, but it's hard to identify any one as being the one that got us there.
Dana Milbank, thank you very much. I appreciate a few minutes.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
All right, everybody. When we come back, it was a small item in the big scheme of things. We've talked about everything from global politics tonight here to obviously the ongoing lingering questions post the Mueller report and other serious items. But yesterday, the Red Sox went to the White House, and many members of that team avoided what has always been something that people look forward to, the trip, as we said, to the White House. Well, the manager of the Sox from Puerto Rico, he's livid about the president's treatment of his home island, and we're going to explain how in many ways this is a sign of where we are right now and how divided our country has become.